Hey guys, this is Bryan from Fantasy Labs. Thanks for watching. I am going to run through the Thursday ownership for Week 8 NFL. This is a video I've been doing every week, but I missed last week as we were getting ready for NBA, so I apologize for that. But back on it this week and back on the regular schedule for the rest of the season. So let's run through this. Again, this is from DFS Report. They put this out every week on Thursday. After they compile all the data from one of the GPPs they enter, which is one of the lowest ones, but it's just because it's the biggest one. So it's a $2 snap, which has about 230,000 entries. So again, large sample size, which is great. And so let's run through these. This is Thursday Night Football. We're not really concerned about that. So let's start with quarterback. So Philip Rivers is the top guy as far as ownership goes, and that kind of makes sense. He is probably the top cash option on either site. His ownership is a little bit lower. Usually we see if there's a kind of a no-brainer top cash option, and I think Rivers is probably that this week, especially with you have Luck and Rodgers in kind of some tough matchups they're going against on Sunday and Monday night, respectively, against the Broncos and the Panthers. So going to get some tough defenses. So I think the fact that those guys are lower owned and the fact that Brady played on Thursday night, usually when we see a guy who's kind of a no-brainer in Rivers this week, we kind of see him a little bit elevated, 15 to 20%. So I'm a little interested to see that it's actually kind of lower. I mean, he hit double digits. He's obviously the only one to do it, but it's not like he's significantly higher than Dalton or Cam. And I think he's probably a little bit better of a cash option than both of those guys, especially considering his price on DraftKings. So maybe that'll go up a little bit more just because he's a little bit better of a bargain and just an elite guy. He is throwing a ton. He's throwing almost 50 passes a game, and it's not like the Chargers are great, but he kind of doesn't have to be because they're just throwing a ton, and he's gotten about 30 fantasy points and still remains cheap in the last 5 or 6 contests. So kind of no-brainer guy. So he'll definitely, especially seeing this, will kind of be the definitely the foundation of my cash lineups. Going down, it's kind of an ugly slate as far as quarterback goes. We got Ben back. So he's going to be interesting, especially if he can go. I think maybe this was a little depressed on FanDuel just because we weren't sure whether he could go or not. He's looks like he's going to. He's probable, but maybe there was some concern about whether that's actually going to happen. Breeze is low too. So I think it's interesting because you have these guys, you have Luck and you have Rodgers, and they're both under 2% owned. And I know that they're in hard matchups, and that's definitely fair. So I could definitely understand going Rivers in cash over those guys, and that's what I'm going to do myself. So I definitely understand that. But I did think it was interesting that they were so low in a tournament. With these guys, especially quarterbacks, they're kind of like the superstars of NBA DFS or whatever you play. They're not really matchup dependent. We know Rodgers is good enough where he can go off against anyone, and that Broncos defense is really good, maybe the best in the NFL. So again, that takes him out of cash consideration, but I still think he should be a little bit higher in GPPs just because he's Aaron Rodgers and still the best quarterback on the planet. So that's interesting. And so I'm probably going to focus on those guys. Mariota is interesting. He's lower because they weren't sure whether he's going to go, but if he's only 0.1% owned against a Texans defense that got just destroyed by the Dolphins last week, 0.1%. Yeah, I can deal with that. So he'll be in a couple tournament lineups. Running back. So Gurley is obviously the top guy. He is just a monster, even though he's a rookie. We usually don't see rookies be this good this early, but he definitely is, and his ownership kind of reflects that, along with the fact that his salary really hasn't jumped up to probably where it should be. He's probably one of the elite running back options in the NFL, and he's still not priced up where some of these other guys are. Freeman is a great play. He's probably close to where his value is. I still think he's probably a little underpriced still, especially in this particular matchup this week. But I think he's probably. I know Bale said that he was his favorite cash game option, and I kind of agree with that. So. It is interesting. So I think you could probably go both of these guys, and I'll probably go both of them in my cash lineups. But If you in a GPP, if you kind of want to fade Gurley for whatever reason, I think that's fine, especially at 40%. You can make a case for fading anyone kind of regardless of what their salary is. I think it's interesting. You could, pay up for Freeman, and it's not like he's super low owned, but obviously 17 compared to 40 is a pretty big deal. Le'Veon Bell is interesting to me, and Forte as well. If again, this kind of goes back to the Luck Rodgers thing, where if you're going to get elite talents, and you're going to get them at lower ownership, and in lower ownership, obviously like 5% or less, then yeah, I mean, why not do that in some GPPs? Le'Veon Bell has been a little disappointing this year, but I think it's just because it's this kind of the Steelers offense as a whole has been kind of down just because of Landry Jones and Michael Vick and Ben not being back. But we saw last year that with Roethlisberger in, and when you have those receivers on the outside, that Bell and Antonio Brown and all those guys, I mean, they're elite talents. And if you have a good quarterback like Ben, then obviously they can shine. So I really like them at kind of the lower price points. Lacey has been really disappointing this year, and his ownership just keeps on going down along with his price. And I know there's probably a debate on, just how good he is. It's probably a debate with a lot of these running backs of just how good they are. It's kind of seems like an interesting year of evaluating running backs, but Lacey's in a really good spot. He's a guy who, the Packers play in the cold and up north, and they're going to kind of rely on Lacey as big guy, big workhorse, especially as it starts to get colder up there. So I think that he's probably due for a big week at some point, especially if they just give him the red zone work. I think they might do that against the Broncos, so I don't hate him. Again, the Broncos are really good, so I get if you want to just use him in GPPs only, but I think we're probably going to have a big Lacey game at some point this year. I don't know if it'll be this week, but I think it'll be pretty soon, so he's interesting, especially at that low ownership percentage. Diggs is popular. There's a lot of people who wanted to fade him last week, and he just continues to impress as a rookie, and still hasn't jumped up in pricing to probably where he should be. He's probably a middle price guy. He's still priced probably a little bit below that. So I think he's probably fine in cash as well as GPPs, even though it's a little bit higher and you can get some of the lower guys. And some of these lower guys we talked about in our podcast on Wednesday. Bales talked about Alshon. He loved him this week, and I thought he was going to be a little bit lower. But he's still not like super high. None of these receivers are really super high. Usually we have a couple guys who are a little bit higher than this, and it seems like it's more spread out this week. So I think you can, I don't know. It's interesting. I think when it gets like this, you kind of just want to, obviously like matchups are important, but you also like to rely on kind of elite talent taking over. So, I mean, you have Evans and Green who are still, and Hopkins, if you just look at this area of the table, and you can see like these are all 4 elite receivers, and they're all, under 9%, as opposed to Stephon Diggs, who isn't an elite talent by any means. I don't think he's been pretty impressive as a rookie, but I don't think we would put him in the same tier as these guys. So if you can get them at their lower price, at the lower ownership points, I mean, they are more expensive, but in tournaments, any of these guys can go off for 200 and 2 touchdowns. So I think it's going to be an interesting week to see, if maybe go back to these guys, because it's been interesting where some of the higher price guys have underperformed lately. And I think that this could be the week where that reverses. Michael Floyd, I'm sure, will be popular because John Brown got ruled out, so that'll be interesting. It is kind of interesting that Moncrief is actually higher owned percentage than Luck, so it looks like people were going naked Moncrief and Hilton as well. So naked Hilton and naked Moncrief, which is interesting because you would think that if people were on them independently, then they would probably be on Luck a little bit more than they were. So I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. I think it's interesting. I think probably says more about luck than those guys. That luck is probably a little under-owned this weekend, so might bump him up as far as how much exposure I have to him in tournaments. The Panthers are really good, but so is Luck, and he's had a down year, but it's not like his talent has changed by any means. So tight end, yes, we have no Gronk this week, so that obviously changes the nature of tight ends. Eifert is definitely a talented dude, and he's kind of one of the better options on the slate. Bale said that his favorite tight end, probably his cash game guy, was Delaney Walker, and you see he's only 3% owned. So I think that he is really interesting, especially with that lower ownership percentage. And tight ends is really not that great this year. Ladarius Green is fairly popular, and I like him in his matchup just because Antonio Gates is out. And if you like Rivers, you probably like Green. At least in my book, I'm fine with a Rivers Green stack. I know that Rivers and probably Keenan Allen will be a popular stack this week, but I'm fine with a Rivers Green stack. So I expect his ownership maybe even to get into the double digits on DraftKings for tomorrow. But yeah, I really like this Delaney Walker play at only 3%. It's kind of an ugly slate for tight ends, but interesting. So lastly, we'll look at defenses. St. Louis is definitely the chalk play. They had 25 DraftKings points last week, and just, the combination of Gurley and the Rams defense, we know that there's a positive correlation between those two, and that's obviously going to be the crazy chalk option, is to go Gurley Rams again. And I think that's a fine cash game play. I think it's probably the safest play out there this week. But you could obviously make a case for fading that combination in GPPs, just because you have Gurley at 40 and St. Louis at 27% owned. And I think both of them would do well, but I think at that high ownership, it probably makes sense to look elsewhere. So that's going to be really interesting, is trying to figure out where to pivot to. And I think that there's some interesting options, even like, Houston and Houston going against the Titans if Mettenberger is going instead of Mariota. I need to check the news and make sure that that Mariota is still questionable, but definitely interesting there, just because I figure actually they would actually be a little bit lower than this. But so I think there's some interesting defenses to figure out, and I think that the question is going to be, I think Rams are probably the obvious choice at their price point, and just their matchup this week in cash games. But to figure out how to differentiate in tournaments is going to be probably what decides a lot of GPPs. So that'll be interesting. And I think it probably depends for me on a lot of the late news as far as today and tomorrow morning goes, as far as quarterbacks and who is playing and stuff, is where I'm going to go in GPPs. But so that's my thoughts for this weekend and the ownership percentages. So thanks again for watching, and good luck in week 8. Talk to you guys next week.